Of all the videos that I've done on the Egyptian gods or the wicked gods or the sacred beasts, you might be surprised to learn there's not a ton of overlap in their comment sections. For example, in the Egyptian god comment section, you have tons of people confused about the effects or saying that they have the best Egyptian god card deck and they beat everyone, versus the sacred beast video where you have a lot of people that are mostly angry about that I said that the sacred beast monsters were better designed than the Egyptian god cards. In the wicked god comment section, you have a lot of people angry that I made fun of the Wicked Avatar's artwork, and also just a lot of people confused that the Wicked Gods even existed, because as I figured when I made that video, a lot of people just forgot Konami even printed those cards as physical cards. But that's not to say there's no overlap, and actually one card appears in the comment section of every single one of those Why Nobody Plays videos that I've made about bad level 10 monsters. Mound of the Bound Creator is sort of the unicorn field spell that to many commenters actually fixes all the issues of those god cards, of those sacred beast cards, when in reality this card doesn't help them that much. And this has come up a few times. One of the biggest times that this thing came up in the comment section was when I made that video trying to make my own Egyptian god card deck. I got tons of comments, like the whole comment section just flooded with people asking why I'm not playing Mound of the Bound Creator. For many commenters, the fact that I didn't play this card was enough proof to them that I didn't know how to build a god card deck, when in reality this card isn't very good and doesn't really help out those level 10 monsters in most cases. In today's video, I want to read through all of the effects on this card and talk about some of the supposed uses for it, but also talk about where it kind of falls short and if there are better examples of field spells to help out these older strategies like the Wicked Gods, the Sacred Beasts, and the Egyptian Gods. Spoiler alert, almost all of those strategies don't really have a better field spell out there than this card, which means in most cases you just don't want to play a field spell at all. The one example of this where they actually do have a better field spell will be the Sacred Beast, and we'll get to that near the end of the video. So why do people keep suggesting Mound of the Bound Creator? Well, the main reason is the very first effect that reads level 10 or higher monsters on the field cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. There are other effects on this card, like if a level 10 or higher monster on the field destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, the player who controlled the destroyed monster takes 1000 damage. And then lastly, when this card on the field is destroyed by a card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can add one divine monster from your deck to the hand. Sure, it has 3 effects, but when most commenters are thinking of this card, they're really thinking of that first effect. And that makes sense, because in all 3 of those Why Nobody Plays videos that I've talked about a few times now already, I mentioned that one of the reasons that those cards aren't very good is because they don't usually have that much protection associated with them. Sure, Obelisk can't be targeted, and things like Slifer prevent your opponent from summoning monsters with things that have less than 2000 attack points, which is pseudo protection, but in general, one of the biggest issues with those monsters that takes so much of an investment is that they don't have any real forms of protection. So if your opponent just hits them with a mere force, you lose everything. You lose the tribute, you lose the big monster, and that's really, really bad compared to other cards. Even when we compare them to other casual cards, most casual cards don't take that much of an investment for that little of a payoff. So a lot of people hear that and say, well, wait a second, why don't you just play Mound of the Bound Creator? Well, the biggest reason is that you shouldn't have to play an additional field spell to protect a monster that you took 3 tributes to summon. I don't think that that's that complicated, and yet I see so many people saying, why don't you just play this card in those decks? Why should you have to play a field spell in addition to your already inconsistent, more casual strategy of these god cards or sacred beasts? Why do you have to play an additional card just to protect them once you get them out? It's already bad enough that you have to lose 3 cards to summon those big monsters, and their effects aren't that good, but it's pretty bad going even a step further and saying, well, now you also have to play this field spell to even make them semi-playable. That is simply too much of an investment to ask out of a player just to give a big monster the same protection that you can get just by normal summoning a Magispector monster. And I get it, that sounds like a silly exaggeration because of course the Magispector monsters don't have a ton of attack points, they don't have that complicated of effects compared to the god cards, but really think about it for a second. You can get the same protection on a normal summonable level 4 monster that you can get by tributing 3 cards and activating a field spell. That is not a good trade-off, and I'm not saying Magispectors are the best deck, I'm not saying Magispectors are the worst strategy out there. There's somewhere in the middle, but I will say that Magispector Kieran is pretty much better than all 9 of these level 10 monsters that I spent this entire video talking about. And maybe Magispectors aren't the best choice because I know that to some ex-Yu-Gi-Oh! players, they have two things that they really hate. Ex-Yu-Gi-Oh players tend to hate pendulum monsters, and they tend to hate monsters that can't be targeted or destroyed. So I understand that the Magispectors aren't the greatest thing, because a lot of people just inherently are going to hate them and say they're overpowered. The fact of the matter is that something like Magispector Kieran wasn't necessarily overpowered because it couldn't be targeted or destroyed. It was overpowered because it bounced a card on either player's turn in addition to its protection effect. When you look at cards like the God cards, even with the Mound of the Bound Creator, the problem is that yes, they're big monsters that can't be targeted or destroyed, but that's not enough. You need other effects in addition to that, and I know Kieran just bouncing a card might not seem that overpowered, but in reality, in practice, this card is so much more powerful than any of these cards that I've mentioned so far, and that makes sense. I mean, we can even look at the ban list and realize that this card is currently banned and caused a huge problem in many of the formats that it was in. Keep in mind though, you can't just have a field spell that gives your monsters some protection and say that that's enough for competitive or even casual use. For example, we have cards like the Cyberdark field spell and the Boss Rush field spell. These are field spells that not only give their archetype the same protection as Mound of the Bound Creator, but actually take it a step further and have decent additional effects in relation to their respective archetypes. That is way better than Mound of the Bound Creator. I know these cards are newer, but they're not that much newer in the grand scheme of things. These cards are all from more of a modern era of Yu-Gi-Oh! But the fact of the matter is that even in the case of those field spells, which are leagues better than Mound of the Bound Creator, they're not quite good enough to make their decks competitive. But wait, you say, Mound of the Bound Creator has additional effects as well. Have you forgotten about those? Well, no, I haven't, but the two additional effects on this card are pretty much useless in most cases. Sure, the 1000 damage is kind of neat, it's kind of cute, but in terms of actually making up the advantage that you lost by summoning those big monsters in the first place, this thing doesn't really help you at all in that case, and that's really what you want out of a field spell for these more casual level 10 strategies. I know that a lot of people think I'm only talking about competitive play, but truly, even in casual play, a card like this just isn't very good because it doesn't actually make up for the problems with these bigger monsters. As for the third effect, I get a lot of comments about that one as well, because I've said in the past, one of the problems with the Egyptian God cards is that they're not very searchable, so you just have to hope to draw them or play too many copies to actually make your hands even worse. The problem with this card searching the Egyptian God cards, which is kind of neat, is that it requires setup. If this thing searched a God card on activation, maybe I wouldn't have even made this discussion in the first place, because at least that would be kind of cool. If it did that, it would give you a free +1, so you're sort of gaining advantage before you lose a lot of it to summon the God cards in the first place, and then also you wouldn't have to play multiple copies of the God cards. You could just stock up on multiple copies of Mound of the Bound Creator. That would be kind of a neat addition to the strategy, but that's not what this card does. It only searches when it's destroyed by a card effect, and I'm aware that there are tons of cards out there that combo and destroy your own cards, and then you can search the God cards, but if you're already playing the God cards, which are inherently inconsistent, you don't want to add more inconsistent combos to your deck just to add them to your hand. Then you'll get stuck with hands that are like all Mound of the Bound Creator, or all God cards, or all cards that destroy Mound of the Bound Creator without any copies of Mound of the Bound Creator. It just creates a lot of consistency problems in an already inconsistent casual deck. But I'm not saying this card has zero uses, casually at least. I think one of the cooler places to play this card is in Gishkis. You can use this card with the Gishki Ritual level 10 monster that actually has a pretty decent effect that gets pluses in the process. That's a pretty cool thing to do, and you can special summon the card, and the deck has a lot of inherent consistency because all the cards sort of search each other. I think in that deck specifically, this is a pretty cool card, or at least in a pretty cool addition to a more casual strategy. I think it might be worth thinking about in a Malefic deck. I think realistically, when you're playing Malefics, you want to play a field spell like Necro Valley to lock your opponent out of the game, but I suppose it wouldn't be too crazy playing Mound of the Bound Creator in combination with like your Malefic Cyber End Dragon to give yourself a 4000 attack monster that can't be targeted or destroyed. Oh my god, I just realized that's better than Obelisk and it's a free special summon. Yeah, I guess just play Malefics instead of the God cards if you really want a 4000 attack monster that can't be targeted or destroyed. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten to mention Fallen Paradise. What's Fallen Paradise, you ask? Well, it's basically Mound of the Bound Creator, but only for Sacred Beast, but like 1000 times better. This card not only has the same protection effect as Mound of the Bound Creator, where you can't target them or destroy them by card effects, but also it gives you 2 free draws every single turn. This is pot agreed every single turn, and this card is so much better than Mound of the Bound Creator. I know it can't be used with the God cards or the Wicked Gods, so if you're playing one of those decks, you're sort of out of luck here, but if you're you're playing Sacred Beast, please play Fallen Paradise instead of Mound of the Bound Creator. This card is so much better. This is a card that is so cool because yes, it's made for a casual deck. Yes, it's not competitively viable, but in relation to the rest of the casual cards that you are playing or that you could play in those types of decks, this thing is just leagues better than any of the other choices, especially when compared directly to Mound of the Bound Creator. Like I mentioned with Mound of the Bound Creator, it doesn't really help you by getting back any of the advantage that you lost by tributing 3 cards to summon whatever you were summoning. It does give you the extra damage, it does have the extra search effect, but it doesn't really matter once you get the monster out. However, in the case of Fallen Paradise, it actually does help you out. You lose 3 cards to summon the big monster, but then you get 2 of them back, or you get 2 draws to replace them, and then on the next turn you get 2 more draws. Actually, now you're +1 overall. That is absolutely crazy good for one of these casual decks, and I would like to see this sort of design implemented into future sort of support cards for the gods, for the Wicked Gods. I don't think the Wicked Gods ever get support, but if we get more god support in the future, I want to see more cards like Fallen Paradise. It doesn't make the deck competitive, and that's completely fine. Not every deck has to be competitive, but it does make it a lot easier for people that actually want to play decks with these old Sacred Beasts, with these old god cards, without totally breaking the archetype in half, and that's exactly what a card like this should do. Before I wrap this video up, I do want to mention I understand why this card exists. Unlike some pieces of support that just look terrible, this one at least comes from a good place. The god cards and the Sacred Beasts and the Wicked Gods probably should already have this protection with their normal effects. However, they don't, and I don't think Konami is trying to go back and buff them and make a new version of them, so this field spell is a way for Konami to go back and give them these bonus protection effects without actually going back and changing the cards themselves. I don't think it really accomplishes this goal because it doesn't actually help the deck overall, unlike something like Fallen Paradise, which actually does make a pretty significant difference in Sacred Beast strategies, but at least I can say I know where they were coming from and that they had good intentions when they made this field spell. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's discussion video. Goodbye.